that I've had with Nikki in the past about, Nikki has developed this training specifically for us, for SCPA and SCPA members. So this is the first time it's ever been presented. It's an amazing opportunity. It's a fantastic collaboration that Nikki and I have entered into. I'd really love your feedback at the end of it, because to me, it just sounds super duper, because it's all about well-being in this world that we're living in at the moment. And whatever learning we can do that makes us more mindful can only be a positive. And as I was saying before, the chat that Nikki and I had some time ago when we began talking about this was, Nikki related the emotional toll that that postgrad study can take on a person is similar to post-traumatic stress disorder. That it is so profound and deeply felt that sometimes it can take some time for a student to recover as such, or perhaps return to some sort of normality in their life, or, they sleep better, or, I'm sure Nikki will talk more to that. So I just found that so interesting and so relevant to what we do at SCPA. So I hope you enjoy it. Before I go any further, I do just want to welcome you to the country that I'm on today, which is Yugambeh country. I'm actually in the land of the mob from Kombumberi language group, which is around Nerang. If anybody wants to acknowledge the country they're on today, pop it in the chat box. It's always interesting to see where everybody is zooming in from. I'd also like to pay my respects to the elders past, present and future and emerging, and acknowledge that the lands were never ceded, and that inside and outside the buildings always were and always will be Aboriginal land. So enjoy today's presentation. I'm going to sit in as well, because I'm super keen to hear this about this amazing research that Nikki's been a part of. And I will just share some, the recording will be available on our YouTube channel, probably tomorrow morning once I've had a chance to load it up. So if there's anything you want to go back to, and I'll hand over to Nikki now, because she's got some things she wants to share to you around housekeeping. So just keep yourselves muted, and Nikki will talk to you about how she'd like to manage that. So I'll stop talking now and I'll hand over to you, Nikki, and thank you all for being here today.
Thank you so much, Jodie. Really, we're deeply appreciative of your care, your duty of care that you have to the student, to the HDR students. So thank you very much for having me here today. I just wanted to say that, navigating liminal spaces, so welcome. Please, would you feel free to, I'm not incredibly familiar with Zoom, but I'd love it if you just spoke, if you have something that you'd like to ask a question, literally just, or if you want to make a comment. It needs to be quite interactive, within reason, because obviously we need to get through the seminar as well. So please just don't leave your questions till the end, or your comments to the end. Feel free to interject. Don't write in the chat, because I probably won't see it. Just talk, and I'll keep quiet and you can have the space. So let's see. All right, so I just want to share with you my journey to the seminar. About 15 years ago, I was at work at Southern Cross in my office in Lismore, on the Lismore campus. And I was talking to my boss. We were chatting about my doctoral research. And I was telling her that I was passionate about the fact that HDR students, often seem to have a really rough time, and that it's a grueling endeavor, and particularly the interaction with supervisors can be particularly uncomfortable. And I was telling her about, in my honors experience, I did my honors in South Africa at a university called Rhodes University, and I'm pretty sure that my supervisor was highly narcissistic, if not a psychopath or sociopath. I managed to get rid of him and get someone else and scrape my way through that degree. And then my master's degree I did in Victoria, at the University of Victoria in Canada, in British Columbia in Canada, on Vancouver Island. And my supervisor fell in love with me, and I had to navigate 2-3 years with this person who, had these inappropriate feelings towards me. So I came into the doctoral studies feeling pretty frazzled about the whole journey. And after telling my my boss all of this, she looked at me and she said, "It sounds to me like you want to investigate liminal spaces." And my whole body just went into goosebumps. I had no idea what the word meant, what the words meant. No clue. I mean, vaguely I had heard of subliminal messages, you know, back in the day. I vaguely remembered hearing that advertising sometimes did subliminal messages, you know, that you couldn't hear to get you to buy something. But that's how the journey to the seminar started. So I'd like to, oh no, what's going on there? Hang on a minute. So today's objective is to explore liminality and for you to think about how you can mitigate the impact of this state during your high degree research journey. So we're going to look at we're going to do this in 3 parts. The first part will be, we'll look at some theory on liminality. And then the second part, we'll look at some real life liminal experiences. So I'm going to give you some empirical evidence on real people who are describing their liminal experiences. So tune in and see whether any of that resonates for you. And then obviously, thirdly, we're going to look at how we can overcome some of these challenges. So the interesting thing about this work is that there is very, very little. And when I say very little, I mean literally a handful of, not even a handful, fewer than a handful of people who have looked at liminality in the world amongst HDR students. So liminality is, you know, their books are written about it. And I mean, this book over here, Threshold Concepts, it's all to do with undergrad studies and very little to do with HDR. So this empirical evidence that you're going to be hearing about is literally almost the only evidence that's around in the world at this time. So first, I want to start off by saying that the word liminality or liminal spaces comes from the Latin word limen, which means, in English, means threshold. So if I'm just going to, can you see this cursor if I put it over there? Can you see that?
Yes, you can see it.
Ah, thank you. So in the HDR journey, which all of you are on, whether you're honors, masters, or doing your doctoral studies, in all disciplines, and you are from all disciplines, there are conceptual gateways or threshold concepts that must be passed through, however difficult that passage might be, to arrive at important new understandings. So given that statement, I just want to read something to you from this book. So this is a story of a potato. So imagine you are the potato, okay? You just put yourself in the position you are the potato. So imagine that you are a raw potato, a Desiree potato. We don't know what it feels like to be such a raw potato, nor are we entirely confident that it is appropriate to consider the subjectivity of such a vegetable. But in terms of your chemical composition, we might imagine an ontological horizon defined in terms of being starchy, watery, and sugary. You're about to enter a state of liminality on the way to becoming a roast potato. Aspects of the journey thus far have been troublesome. You've lost your red skin. Your delectable yellow, creamy flesh has been exposed. You've been parboiled to get rid of some of your starch. Your outer surface has been roughened. You don't know it, but there's still more trouble ahead. That first glimpse of the other potatoes and the hot fat may be the first sign of what things may look like on the other side of the portal. You're not yet a roast potato, and you do not know what it is like to be a roast potato. And in the preliminary stages of getting to where you are now, you could have entertained other options, such as keeping your skin on for a start. As a peeled, parboiled potato, you still have some options. You can, for example, be transformed into mash or something more exotic like soufflé de patate. With a bit of creative luck, you might even assume the mantle of pomme boulangère or gratin dauphinoise. But once you hit the fat, that's pretty much it. You are beginning to cross the portal that is the heat-induced process of caramelization, an irreversible chemical process that will transfigure your identity. You will look, feel, smell, and taste different. you'll have entered a new space, the world of caramelized roast potatoes. Sadly, the potato has no self-determination, no control over experiences, which either encourage or discourage an understanding of liminality, and we will leave it to its destiny at the point of caramelization. But there is a serious side to this imaginary journey. As Glenda's cousin points out in chapter 19 of this volume, liminality addresses the kind of complicated learner transitions that learners undergo, generating a supportive learning environment to sustain learners while they negotiate such transitions is a deep appreciation of a dialectic between knowing and being. So I thought I just absolutely love that little piece because it's humorous and it sort of tells us to just laugh at the predicament that we find ourselves in. So just to get back to liminality, Victor Turner, who's an anthropologist, called this passage that's referred to as a state of being in limbo. So the word liminality, we all know what it feels like to be in a state of limbo, which means basically to be between established states. You've kind of left the shore of one identity and you're in the boat and you're rowing across to the other side, but you haven't yet arrived on the other side to a new identity. It most certainly is a rite of passage. And Victor Turner actually did look at, as an anthropologist, at remote tribes. I mean, one tribe that comes to mind is the Abaqueta in the Xhosa tradition. The Xhosa people in South Africa, when the boys get to a certain age at puberty, they have to enter this initiation process in which they get circumcised. First of all, they get covered in white paint. They're naked. They get driven off into the wilderness, circumcised, and they have to fend for themselves. Some die actually because of just the lack of medical care, and it's a pretty serious rite of passage from boyhood to manhood. So it implies an initiation. It certainly is a state of transition. Usually it's a humbling process where the initiate feels powerless, where they are submitting to ordeal in preparation for elitehood. They're being broken down and then refashioned and transformed into greater maturity and status. Does that sound familiar to anybody as an HDR student? So that's what the word means, liminal spaces. So examples of liminal spaces. So literally it means to be betwixt and between states of identity. It's usually marked by an increase in status or even title. So if you are doing a PhD, then you're going to have a new title at the end of it. You're going to be Dr. So-and-so. So there's high stakes in this particular liminal space usually. So, and other examples could be engaged to be married. So you're no longer single, but you're not yet married. So you're in this liminal space of being engaged. You've left, but you haven't yet arrived. Pregnancy is another one. When a pregnant woman is not quite a mother, but she's not a mother. So she's in a liminal time space between those two identities. Cancer is another one. Illness is another one where you're not well, but you're not dead. You're still in between. You are in a liminal space of illness. Physically, hallways, airport streets are also liminal spaces. They tunnels and passages which are used to transition from one place to another. So 8 features of this space, and you need to remind yourself, I am in this space. As a HDR student, I am in this space. So it's a rite of passage. You are you enter the study, whether it's honors, masters, or PhD, and there's a passage that you are going to have to follow to get to the other side. You're going to feel like you're in limbo because you are suspended between your past identity before you entered into the program and your future identity when you've actually got the degree, you've been awarded the degree. It certainly is transformative, and that knowledge that you've gained is irreversible. It cannot be undone. You're going to be changing your scholarly identity and your scholarly status. You almost certainly well, you are isolated. This is a journey that you undertake pretty much alone. Only you can do it by your, you achieve this degree. And you might have feelings of loneliness that accompany that, that fact of being isolated. Other emotions or states that are around this time space, liminal space, is that it's an ambiguous space. There's nothing clear about it. It's ambiguous. You cannot see your way forward clearly. And as a result, there's also a lot of uncertainty. Nothing is certain. There's a lot of decisions that have to be made, a lot of choices that have to be made along the way, which means that you have to live in a state of uncertainty. And as a result of all these things, there's almost undoubtedly, for 99.9% of people, there's levels of anxiety. So which of these features can you relate to in your HDR journey? This is a question I'm putting out there. So these are the characteristics of being in a liminal space. Not fun, actually. So HDR students are going to feel intellectually challenged. They're going to, and it's because you're going to be coming across troublesome new knowledge that is difficult to acquire. If it wasn't difficult, then it wouldn't be worth acquiring. So it's almost like that's just a default. So by the way, this is coming from the research. There's very little research on the feelings and emotions of HDR students, but this is coming, this is directly out of the research that does exist. I didn't put all the references in, but I can always supply those to you if you're interested. So they feel intellectually challenged. They feel that acquiring this new knowledge is difficult and troublesome. There's almost across the board, there's a loss of self-esteem and a loss of self-confidence. There's strong emotions. People feel, HDR students feel like they feel inauthentic. They feel like they're an imposter, pretending to be on top of what's going on, pretending to understand, pretending to be at the level that everybody else seems to expect them to be at. There's a lot of people feel stressed and exhausted. People feel disillusioned. They feel like they're a failure. They feel depressed. And they often feel stuck, like they don't know which way to turn. Everything's ambiguous, everything's uncertain, and there's all this anxiety. So that is what HDR students generally feel like, to a lesser or greater extent. So I just want to read some of the evidence. So these are real people from a real study. So this is not just made up. This is actually people talking, sharing their experience. So the first aspect I'd just like to look at is difficulty with troublesome knowledge and processes. So one candidate said, there are times when it felt really tough. There have been aspects of my PhD that I found very difficult, especially with developing my writing. A supervisor said, I think a PhD is one of the most difficult endeavors that most students will ever undergo. The challenges are substantial. I often say to students, I'm not sure we will ever again reach that level of intellectual stretch that you really need, particularly when you're in that phase of analyzing your data and trying to pull the so what out of it. Another student said, I cannot get this concept into my head. So in the HDR journey, there's this thing called conceptualization, which your supervisors might talk to you about. And if you Google it, you can actually find out what it means. And basically what it means is that in the degree that you're doing, you have to be able to put new knowledge together in a way and theory together in a way that creates a new concept. And that is called conceptualization. So every bit of original research has to have this element of conceptualization in it in order for it to be original and to make a significant contribution. So this student said, I cannot get this conceptualization in my head. I cannot link these two concepts together or get some of this stuff in order in a scholarly fashion. My confirmation was awful. Turns out that I did not have a clue what I was talking about. So if I'm going to be asked difficult questions or asked about theory that I've not considered yet, that makes me feel very on edge and guarded. Another student said, it's a humbling process. I'm a better woman, a better academic, a better thinker because of experiencing this difficulty. Another supervisor said, for many candidates, the emotional journey is arduous. It's tough on most PhD students. There's not a whole lot of things in your life where you say from time to time, I cannot do this. The supervisory relationship in those situations becomes critically important because it's my job to facilitate the shift where they recognize and own that they can do it. So the important thing to notice there is that this supervisor is acknowledging, and this was a woman, she was acknowledging that the relationship that she had with her students is her job. So she took ownership of that. Can you guys hear the noise in the background? I'm just quickly going to close the door. Hold on, people. I'll be right back. Sorry, guys, that's the joys of working from home. Okay, then the last candidate says there's something on an emotional level, like a threshold, with getting through the candidature assessment that made me feel a lot more confident and independent. The process of confirmation, was quite an affirming type of process I found. So here we see some clues into how to mitigate this arduous, emotionally and intellectually tough journey. And so we got one clue here. The supervisor needs to take some ownership of the relationship and the support. And here we also get a clue that when we do make our way through it and progress through all the ambiguity, it starts building confidence and we start feeling more independent. So how about anxiety, ambiguity, and uncertainty? This is what some people said. So the candidate said, the anxiety is relentless. It never goes away. Even on Christmas Day, we think we should actually read that last chapter. It's like having homework that is never finished. Sometimes I deal with anxiety better than others did, but it's a long, hard, lonely trail. Another candidate said, well, she just rolled on about all the anxieties. The key anxieties were the ethics thing. That was challenging. It took me months and months to get mine approved. So that was quite stressful. Another thing that caused anxiety is I did not have the data to move forward. There were delays with some of the interviews. That made me quite anxious. I knew I would never get it done in 3 years, but it really blew out. And especially when you're working with government departments, there's pressure on it being finished because they part funded the scholarship. In addition, near the end, there's this huge amount of pressure to finish. You have it all written, but in my case, it was over the word limit. I had to get it back, and that made me very anxious. And I thought, I can't do this. A supervisor said, shining some light on this, with anxiety, there are going to be tensions. And they're referring to the tensions in the relationship between the supervisor and the student at different points in the process, but that is the nature of doing a research degree. It's just inherent. So neuroscience tells us that when the positive psychologists use this phrase, name it to tame it. And basically when we acknowledge that we are experiencing something, it takes it out of the amygdala, which is the fight and flight response area of the brain, and it pushes it into the frontal lobe, which is where we can actually think. So psychologists use this as a tool, name it to tame it. So this supervisor, by saying it's just inherent, this is the nature of doing a high degree research study. There's going to be anxiety, and somehow that alleviates the anxiety. So another supervisor said, to some extent, there's a role for intellectual anxiety in the whole scholarly endeavor. In this process of PhD candidature, they have to encounter something difficult and overcome it in order for it to be a valuable enterprise. Another candidate said there's a certain obscurity to some of the conversations, and if one needs to work out priorities and values that take a while to understand, and that makes you anxious. So there's a lot of subtext and a lot of tacit knowledge that the student is not privy to, and having to understand what's actually valuable and what's important creates a lot of anxiety at times. Another candidate said the anxiety is very much about your worthiness, whether you just haven't got sufficient capacity to really engage in that level of work. And then finally, there's another candidate said there's anxiety around feelings of inadequacy, meeting deadlines, and pleasing people. And he was referring to supervisors. So these are real emotions that people were feeling around their degree. And I just want you just to think about whether any of that resonates with you. Just two more aspects. Another candidate said that candidature involves a lot of conferencing as well, standing up repeatedly, discussing different aspects of your work at international conferences and writing for peer-reviewed journals, which is sort of anxiety-provoking. There's self-disclosure, there's self-exposure. You're asked repeatedly to discuss your topic and project at all aspects and justify it, and be knowledgeable about all the contributors in the field. That is very anxiety-provoking. A last candidate said, I was not very experienced in the field of my topic. It has been a big learning process all the way, and my supervisor had faith in me. That somehow took the pressure off. That helped relieve my anxiety and allowed me to move forward. So again, we see another little clue there. Supervisor had faith in me. Okay, so we need people to have faith in us, around us, to alleviate this absolutely inevitable levels of anxiety that we are going to experience in the course of the study. So the second area that causes trouble is this thing of identity formation. So it's a thing that gets researched and looked at, is that university students, the HDR students, are going to be undergoing an identity formation on their way to becoming scholars. So one supervisor said, the scholarly identity needs to happen in students. I think it comes from that self-respect of knowing that you've done a good job, and that the way I think and what I've published has benefits for a whole range of reasons. But part of it is becoming is that beginning feeling of prowess in their scholarliness. So that's a thing. Becoming a scholar is a thing. Someone else said, the process of becoming a scholar is scary. It makes candidates nervous and anxious because you are judged big time. Another supervisor said about her student, the only time I see him being dependent is with his writing, where he lacks confidence. There has to be a point at which you push this person onto their feet. You cannot enable that helpless behavior, because if you allow it, they'll become too dependent on you, and that's no good for anyone. So that's from the supervisor's point of view, observing the student and thinking they're lacking confidence, they're dependent. What do I do to support them to become independent? A candidate said, my supervisor said, I want a paper for this conference, so write a paper. Well, how do I go about that? So I mean, pushing me in that sense. However, a pivotal quality is her empathetic understanding of being able to know what drives the passion in me and how to get the best out of me, which buttons to push. So again, we see there that the supervisor's empathetic understanding mitigated the effects of being in this liminal space, of which anxiety is one of the characteristics. Another supervisor said, I think that the supervisory relationship for them is quite critical for that whole identity formation to take place, to come to understand what it is to be a researcher and a scholar. The relationship allows the student to explore that, to model that a bit, and to take the parts that are relevant and leave the bits that are not. I think the relationship really has many functions quite beyond getting them to the finishing line. I think it's how they form as a scholar. So again, we see that the supervisory relationship is a very, very important relationship to mitigate being in a liminal space. So if we look at we're now onto part 3. If we have a look, we can see that there are ways in which we can overcome these intellectual and emotional challenges. The first one, and probably the most important one, is recognizing the importance of the supervisory relationship. Now, most people have more than one supervisor, so that relationship can be with one person or many people, or you can find a supportive external person that is in loco parentis, so to speak, of if you don't have a supervisor that you can have a supportive relationship with, then you need to find someone to take the place of that person. So this is some of the things that people said. The supervisor said, I think the relationship is central. Adult relationships are the conscious ability to form and maintain relationships under difficult times. So you must remember that obviously in a supervisory relationship, it's a long-standing relationship. In the honors student doing a research honors, it may be slightly less long. Masters, it's probably 2 years at least, and PhD can be up to 8 years. So yes, it's going to have difficult times. So how do we maintain relationships for a long period of time? So as another supervisor said, for some candidates, the supervisor is as important as thesis. The quality of the relationship is really very important. Some candidates have said that the interpersonal relationship is the reason for them getting through. A candidate said the relationship is critical. I don't know how you can get through candidature if you do not have these important relationships in terms of what is an incredibly demanding journey. Your own drive, perseverance, and hard work gets you so far. But it is the relationship with my supervisors and the level of personal support that gets you through. So I just want to make a point here about how personal support is different from professional support. So obviously we expect from the supervisor to get professional support, their intellectual contribution is critical to you in your discipline. But this research shows that the levels of personal support are even more important than the professional support. So how do you foster that? We'll talk about that in a minute. So another supervisor said, I think the relationship is make or break for your success in doing your PhD. I fundamentally believe that. I feel for students where they do not perceive the relationship as understanding their needs. The candidate said, and this person had a really good relationship with their supervisor, I feel safe in the relationship. I feel that he likes me, that we have a positive relationship. We are friendly, and there's warmth in the relationship. So we start seeing qualities that we need to foster in our relationships with our supervisors or our those sort of significant other people that are supporting us on this journey. We need to feel safe in that relationship. There needs to be warmth in the relationship. Because you see, these are the things that mitigate those feelings of lack of self-confidence, loss of self-esteem, feeling an imposter, feeling inauthentic. There has to be safety in the relationship to overcome those feelings. So if we look at this little diagram, if we look at that center, so we want a supportive supervisory relationship. How do we get there? We as the student, how do we get there? So first of all, yes, this area on the left here, we do expect professional expertise, and generally we get that from our supervisors. But we need to be aware that we also need personal support, and we need to be able to know how to go about getting personal support from us people that are on our team, supervisory team. Some of the ways some things that are really important are interpersonal communication skills. So it's about setting contracting around timing around communications, emails that get sent backwards and forwards, feedback that gets sent backwards and forwards. The etiquette of good interpersonal communication skills are that feedback is positive. It might be critical, but it's in a positive, it's got a positive tone. So those people who are highly skilled, and not all the supervisors are, so therefore the student has to bring that to the relationship as well. A key thing is this thing of empathetic understanding. And basically empathy is saying, I see your problem through your eyes. I see it as if I am you. I'm not you, and I'm not feeling it exactly like you. I'm not falling apart, but I have a window into what you're going through, and I have an understanding of what you're going through. And supervisors who create supportive relationships have a very high level of empathetic understanding. And they demonstrate that by saying things like, you know, I can see that your child is, you know, you're telling me your child's been sick for, you know, it's got whooping cough or whatever, sick baby. I can understand that you need to take 6 weeks off. That's not a problem. We'll pick it up when you get back. That would be an example of empathetic understanding. So what it boils down to really is emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is marked by characteristics like kindness, humility, compassion, empathy, and even things just like paying attention and having time for your student, and not being in a state of dis-ease or, you know, internally rushed and urgent interactions. So all of these things together create someone who we can say this person is emotionally intelligent. Another aspect is of being able to mitigate these, the situation of being in this liminal space is to foster openness and flexibility. So if you're on an academic journey that is ambiguous and it's marked by uncertainty, there's no certainty, you have to make decisions, and you often have no control over what's coming at you. You have to be open and flexible in order to manage the emotional impact of being in this space. So 3 more things that are important just to mention is that in this journey, this HDR journey, as an HDR student, whether you honors, master's, PhD, you need to be aware of what are your attitudes to the power differential, and what are your people that are your examiners or your supervisors, what are their attitudes to the power differential. So there is a power differential between a student and the people who are in charge of the program. There's an unequal power. There's unequal power between the student and the people who are running the program, whether it's your supervisor, your examiner, whoever they may be. And those power differentials can sometimes be unhealthy and play out in unhealthy ways, which affects, first of all, it affects the relationship. And secondly, it affects the way the student can handle and manage and mitigate and be in this liminal space. So it's important to just be aware that the power differential needs to be managed, and how do you do that? So that brings us to, you know, how do we do that? Well, we do it through equality. Equality means that even in a hierarchy, people are considered equally valuable. And both parties in the power differential need to know that and be committed to that. So it's about just foregrounding equality. And that's through simple things like when you meet with your supervisor, how much time is spent with them talking and how much time is spent with the student talking. A lot of the research shows that supervisors dominate the supervisory meetings. They speak for 80% of the time. So we all know that the person who's speaking is the one who's actually learning. So how much is the student actually learning if they're only speaking, allowed to speak? And how equal is the relationship if the student is only speaking 20% of the time? So it's about managing that, in the relationship with your supervisor. This also just brings to mind the dependence-independence continuum. So on one end, you've got highly dependent students. And on the other end of the continuum, you've got a highly independent student. And also the supervisor has a comfort level of where they feel comfortable for their students to be. They may feel very comfortable in having dependent students and very uncomfortable in having an independent student, or vice versa. So it's quite important to be aware that the style on this continuum needs to be a good match and a good fit between the two, the student and the supervisor. Obviously, someone who's highly dependent and the supervisor who doesn't want dependent students, that's not going to be a good match, and vice versa. So two words that come up a lot in this arena of how to mitigate being in a liminal space in this journey of the HDR is respect and trust. So a candidate said, I think there has to be trust and respect. If there isn't that between you and the supervisor, then you should be looking for another supervisor. It's too hard to get through without having a positive and supportive supervisory relationship. And then another candidate said, in talking about the good relationship, I suppose that empathetic quality brought a little bit more trust. Knowing that he had an understanding of my life situation and empathy towards that takes the pressure off. I'm not afraid of him. Nothing escapes his attention, but there's no judgment. I would not feel that making a mistake or not having completed something that I said I would have done by this particular date in any way diminished me. He would say, okay, what do we need to do from here? So I think that gives us a lot of insight into the importance of the supervisory relationship, and that these kinds of qualities are present to take that pressure off, and then to therefore alleviates anxiety, etc. So I think in summary, we can say that, we need empathy, understanding, non-judgment, kindness, prompt responses and communication, are an indication of some of these things. Okay, the second thing is valued, and I can't see this, but so what does that say? Valued academic community. I think that's what it probably says. So traditionally and classically and across the world, the academic community is marked by rivalry, competition, and independence. Because think about it, we're creating new knowledge that we own. However, we didn't come at that by ourselves. We came at it by climbing onto the shoulders of the people before us. So classically, researchers, academics are highly independent, depending on, of course, the discipline. I mean, a lot of scientists do work together in teams, but usually there's a lead scientist, and that team will be very independent from, the next one down the road at the next university. So rivalry, competition, and independence does not foster a safe environment. So instead, what we want to see is reciprocity versus rivalry. We want to see collaboration versus competition, and we want to see collegiality versus independence. These qualities here, reciprocity, collaboration, collegiality, create what Carl Rogers calls a safe environment, what the psychologists call a safe environment, which then means that the student can actually function in a safe environment as opposed to one where there's rivalry, competition, and independence. And in fact, in some people's experiences, their biggest rival and their biggest competitor is their supervisor. So how do we do this? We can view the development of the thesis. So, and the thesis, of course, is the whole work from beginning to end. It's the conceptual idea in the beginning, it's conceptualization, it's methodology, the gathering of the data, all the phases of a high degree research study. If that's co-created, it creates an environment, an academic community that is conducive to alleviating the worst effects of being in liminality. One example of that is publishing together. Everything pretty much is wrapped up in that. That's reciprocal. Two parties are both getting something. There's equality, because if you both your names are on the paper, then and you've contributed, then there's equality. There's also recognition of you being an equal thinker with your person that you're publishing with. There's collaboration and there's collegiality. So publishing together is a great way to foster a healthy academic community. And the other way is to foster a culture of support, and this is done through personal support, not just professional support, but personal support. So this is marked by things like the supervisor knows who you are, knows a bit about your life, knows your struggles and your challenges in your life, and works with you on a personal level. And obviously there have to be boundaries, but we're talking here in generalities. So in conclusion, if we have to think of 5 keys to success, personal support is absolutely key to creating an environment that is safe and that mitigates all these negative emotions that we are going to feel and have to work with throughout this journey. As students, what you can do is to work on being open and flexible. These are qualities that the psychologists say show the most resilience. So we need resilience is what we're after here, because it's a long, hard journey. So we need to work on openness and flexibility, especially when things are ambiguous and there's uncertainty. The best way to handle that is to be open and flexible. The third one is to work on the respect and trust. Something that came out of this research was that respect comes from having qualities that we admire. So that's not so difficult to achieve that. Trust comes from these qualities being consistently present. Trust is a very fragile thing, can be very easily broken. It can take a long time to build trust, and it can be broken in an instant. I always think of a spider web as an example of trust. Spider web is incredibly strong. I mean, I think it's got, the strength for its size and all of that, it's got this incredible strength. But if a bird flies through a spider web, that spider web's gone. So trust is built through being consistent. The students that I interviewed said, we don't really mind what qualities are present, as long as they're just consistently present. That builds trust. A fourth area would be equality versus this negative or unhealthy power differential. So how do we foster equality? And often it's through something like publishing together. And then the final very important point and key is this notion of intentionality. Because when we know why something works, it works better. So when we intentionally acknowledge that a liminal space is a challenging time space, we are going to feel and there's going to be ambiguity, uncertainty, there's going to be anxiety. There are going to be strong emotions. There's going to be intellectual difficulty. When we intentionally then bring these things to mitigate that, we do mitigate it. Because when we know why something is the way it is, somehow it works, it either dissipates. When we intentionally apply a solution, it just works better. So I'd like to ask you the question now, which of these things that we've been talking about have you been currently experiencing? How are you feeling now about your HDR journey? What is one thing that you've learned about being in a liminal space? Something that surprised you, something that you will do differently now? So are there any thoughts, feelings, questions? Please open it up to the floor now. Thank you.
Nikki, I have a comment.
Yeah. Hi, Dennis.
Hi. Thank you for this presentation. It's been fascinating for me. And the reason for that is that I finished 9 months ago.
Congratulations.
I'm a mature age, thank you. I'm a mature age student who's done a lot of things in my life. And I found doing the PhD very difficult, especially towards the end. I found the writing up very difficult. I took about 8 months to do that, and I had 2 days off in that 8 months.
Yeah.
And I thought the problem was me in that I lacked discipline, which I do. I thought that was the main problem, but just about everything you've spoken about today, I've experienced. And it feels good to me that it's not just me who experienced or ran into the difficulties that I ran into. It seems that it's a fairly common experience. So I'm grateful that you've pointed that out to me.
Yes, Dennis, absolutely right. You know, the funny thing is that there's very little research on this experience. It's like the academic culture is survival of the fittest. If you don't have what it takes to then you need to be culled. There's a lot of that at the back of people's minds, is that you either make it, and if you don't make it, then you don't belong here anyway. So there's very, very little research that is exposing and I believe that there's a duty of care on the part of the administration to expose these realities and to put in place intentionally and consciously measures to mitigate this state that the student is going to be in as a result of the nature of an HDR course of study. So congratulate yourself on being a survivor.
Thank you.
You know, in America, 50% of HDR students drop out. There's a 50% attrition rate. In Australia, it's less, it's about 19%. But it's still 19% that's, we've still got work to do something about the 19%. Yeah.
If I can just say one other thing, I wish I had experienced this presentation at the start.
Yeah, exactly.
That would have been very helpful to me. And the second thing is, I see my experience as being more than a survivor. It to an extent, it was that, especially towards the end. But to a large extent, when I look back on my thesis now, I'm writing up my results chapters to publish them now.
That's right.
And when I look back on it, I think this is really good.
Yeah.
I think this is really good stuff. And I'm grateful to my supervisors now, rather than annoyed, that they push me so hard.
All right.
Because when I read it, I think this is really good stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm not just a survivor. I'm very proud of
Yes.
where the three of us, what we produced.
Absolutely right. And you co-created that together. But as you say, it would have been nice to know that everybody is in the same boat in the beginning, and right the way through. Because somehow it makes us feel better when we know that it's not us, not just us. If they can get through, I'm going to get through, so I just got to grin and bear it and get through this period of time. And I'm going to feel these feelings, and well, how do I mitigate that? Yeah. So I think you're right. It's this kind of information needs to be, those events that they have, I think twice a year at the university for new students. This kind of thing needs to be talked about at the beginning.
Yes.
Anybody else?
I wonder if there's anybody in the group who would be prepared to share their story if they are perhaps at the beginning of their higher degree research.
Yeah, that'll be amazing.
And might be a nice contrast to have against Dennis's, where he's completed his and the feelings and thoughts that he had around that, with perhaps someone who's at the beginning of theirs.
Yeah, please go ahead. Anybody who'd like to share.
I'd like to hear from Shelley, because Shelley and I were doing this at the same time and bumped into each other at different times. And from talking to Shelley, I know she was very, very particular about her work, and I'd like to hear what she has to say about this.
There you go, Shelley, you're on the spot.
Thanks, Dennis. Just before I launch into what I'm going to say is, I got a lot of personal support from Dennis and a couple of the other more mature, bunch of mature age researchers. So that was really helpful for me along the way. But the turning point for me in this whole process was when I submitted to the ordeal. I think I got to and it's quite a hard thing to describe, but it was the moment where I went, I know this is tough, and I have done everything I possibly can, and I have nothing more to give. And I think that was probably the push to the end, and that moment of going, yes, this is an ordeal and I've just got to get through it, started to unwind some. I don't know whether it was an expectation or whatever, but maybe I just gave up all ideas of perfectionism at that point and just went for, I've got to get this over the line. So
yeah,
there were definite emotional milestones along the way that I think are inherent in the process. And it was through coming to those points and moving through them, working through them, not necessarily with my supervisors, but with their, as many sort of the support I could get, that actually were like little moments through the whole process. And yeah, that was my experience.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Shelley. Is there anything that you would have done differently, knowing what you know now? I think that's a really interesting question to ask everybody actually in the room today. Is there anything that you can do differently now? Would anybody be willing to share? And obviously this applies to people that are not finished.
Nikki, can I just read you out something that Jessica has shared in the chat box?
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming you don't mind me sharing this, Jessica, because you've posted it to everybody. I'll just read it out to you. Jessica says, the discussion on anxiety, etc., was very accurate to my story. I burned out within the first 3 months of my master's. I became very sick and depressed and had to take a 6-month break. However, now I've learned some very, very important lessons about taking care of myself and my anxiety. I'm starting the master's research again and after the absence, and though I'm currently still sick, I have a different viewpoint now. I've learned that I'm not superhuman, and I feel that I can better manage myself and form a better relationship with my supervisors by being open and honest instead of trying to be independent.
Yeah.
Wow, Jessica, that's very raw, isn't it? Mm.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
And
Nikki, I have something to say in response to what would I do differently now, but I only want to do that when everyone else has finished making their contributions.
Okay. You know, I think what Jessica's saying here is that we need to, you know, where she says to have a honest relationship, but you see, it's so difficult to have that honest relationship because you're already feeling so, you have your confidence is already so fragile that it's not really the right space to become vulnerable and open. It's very, very difficult, and it can only be done in a very, very secure relationship with the supervisors, because it's like they're the ones who are going to turn on you. If they're going to turn on you, they're going to turn on you then at that moment in time. Very, very difficult journey to navigate your way through this. I must say a really important thing is the peer support that Shelley and Dennis are talking about. You know, the person to call and ring and go and spend time with is your person, your buddy, your study buddy, who's also going to be doing confirmation of candidature on Monday, and it's Sunday afternoon and you're freaking out, you know, emotional space, and there's a lot at stake. So in that regard, it's almost identical to the therapeutic relationship. But we obviously have to remind ourselves that it is not that, we're not expecting supervisors to become therapists. But we are expecting them to create an environment that includes personal support. Because the affective domain is as important as the cognitive domain. We know this. So educators know that you cannot make intellectual gains unless you are in a comfortable affect, you know, your emotional, the emotions play as an important a role as the intellect in creating, in studying, in basically in learning. So, you know, that's the responsibility of the supervisor to provide that, not the student to divulge things that they don't feel comfortable. So I hear you completely. Yeah.
Thank you.
Wow. Dennis, do you want to go now?
Yes, I just wanted to say what I would do differently. I had 3 phases of data collection, and the middle one was by an online survey, and it was closed-ended questions, so it had to be analysed statistically. Yeah. I know nothing about statistics. My supervisor said to me, find a master's student who's very good at statistics and pay them $250 to do all of your statistics one weekend.
Yeah.
And being me, said, that's cheating. I'm not going to do that. This is a PhD. I have to learn to do the statistics. Oh. And it took me 8 months to do that. Stop laughing. Nikki, would you mind not laughing at me, please? It took me 8 months to do that, banging my head against a brick wall, 8 one-hour tutorials with a statistician, months of work on the phone with my son, who's a mathematician. If I did it again, I would listen to my supervisor, who said, pay someone to do it in a weekend. And I did it my way because I thought one day I'll be presenting this and someone during the question session will ask me a question that I don't know the answer to in the statistics. And I said, I have to know everything and be able to answer that. Having finished, I would have listened to my supervisor this time. I had wonderful supervisors. I listened almost all the time, but I would now pay someone else to do the statistics and not pretend I'm a statistician and
Absolutely.
save 8 months.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. That's so. Choose your battles. Goodness, choose your battles.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not one you want to choose. That one. Gordon, do you want to go ahead with your question?
Yes, I just wanted to thank everybody today. I'm just a student of finishing my Master of Social Work, and I would like to I'm really thankful for all the input that I got from everybody who spoke today, and it's a very valuable lesson, and I would wish we would have this much earlier into our studies and so on, because it's such an important topic. And yeah, I did share a YouTube clip from the Deutsche Welle. That's a fact versus it's a documentary about fact versus fake, where it's explored in this clip, actually, this dichotomy in academy and the power relationships, which sort of lean into the topic and topics discussed. So I highly recommend this. I watched it just recently. Actually, it came out this week. So it's an amazing journey, actually, and challenging times ahead for academics. So yeah, it was also, I think, 2 weeks ago on the ABC radio, the challenges of academia, actually, in Australia, where people find themselves in really tough positions because of the COVID now actually highlighting all these challenges. So yeah, once again, thank you for that. And I could not agree more with what everybody else said. And thank you, Nicole,
You're welcome.
For your work.
Thank
Greatly
you.
appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comment. Very, very, very important and well noted. Jody?
There's just another question here from Bodika. Just a comment, I think. I'll just read it. I haven't read it through yet. I just started my master's in this term, so nothing to share in this regard, but I had a feeling of lost emptiness and felt useless immediately after finishing my first degree a long time ago and after completion of a professional qualification. Not sure if this is related to what you discussed today. I had to be in and out of the session as I'm at work. I will go over the recording later, but I got over it within a few weeks as I fell back into real life. So I guess what Badika is saying is that his wasn't a long-lasting impact after finishing his first degree, that feeling of lost and emptiness.
Yeah. I think that's called, there's a name for it. It's like a loss of purpose. So, you know, when you put everything you've got into something and it's finished, there's a vacuum. You have to find new purpose and, new meaning. It's an existential thing going on there around lack of meaning. You know, people have it when they have midlife crises. They have it when they empty nest syndrome. You know, people say, I should have felt so amazing, but I didn't. I felt horrible. You know, I thought I was going to feel so great because having achieved this great achievement, but then I didn't feel that. And it's because you no longer have the same, you put everything you had into something and now it's over. So you're going to find a new thing to find purpose and meaning about.
Can I just say something, Nick? The thing I think that stands out for me in everything that's been spoken about today is definitely the personal support. And that works really well for me. And it's not even around, whether I've got sick children or whatever. It's just that as a mature age who works full time and is external to the campus and doesn't have the scaffolding of being on campus, being, on scholarship or doing it in 3 years. So it's taken me 8 years to do my PhD. And if it wasn't for the personal support, that has really been what's carried me through. And having a master's in Gestalt therapy has actually shown me the value of that, and not feeling as though I'm letting myself down, reaching out for the support as I needed it. Because I think the other thing around, you know, I'm doing a PhD is that there's some sort of understanding that you've got it all together. And if you reach for support, then you're going to be sort of judged as less than or not as competent or whatever.
Exactly.
So,
and the thing is that you fall. So it's a bit like saying to a baby who's sitting, you know, why you can't fall over. You should be, in fact, you should be running. You know, well, the baby's only going to get there when it gets there, you know, at the right stage. But unfortunately, the environment doesn't allow for those realities, you know, the reality of formation. It's a harsh environment, and it doesn't need to be like that. It needs to change, basically. So.
Well, I actually wonder about that, Nick. I actually wonder if the harshness is, you know, that rite of passage.
Yeah, there you go.
In some ways that, you know, unless it is really difficult and you do get to the point where, you know, there's blood on the floor.
Yeah.
That it's actually not, you know, recognized as having the value.
True.
So I really do wonder if there'll be inadvertent consequences.
Yeah, you're right. You know, I mean, not everybody gets into this arena, HDR arena, because it's known to be tough. So in a way, it's very elite, isn't it? Question is, should it be? Anyway, well, that's another philosophical question that we don't need to answer today. Thanks, Pete. Thank you so much. I don't know what the
Sorry, that was me on mute. We've got a couple more questions. Annie has would like to ask a question, and if anyone wants to go ahead with that, and then Meryl, I'll read yours out of the chat box after that, if that's okay with you. Oh, Meryl has to go, so will we just, Nick, Annie, do you mind waiting a second, and I'll just read Meryl's out before she goes. Is that okay? Thank you.
No problem.
So Meryl's her comment is, thanks so much for this seminar, very much appreciated. It does reassure me to know that we're not alone in many of these feelings. It's a roller coaster, ! I'm working with polar opposites of supervisors, which is a challenge in itself. One completely unempathetic and the other very understanding. I'm relying on the latter very much, though it's tricky when one with zero empathy has so much pull on my project. Yeah, that's an interesting point, isn't it? Because I guess human nature would have you gravitate towards that supervisor who is providing you with that additional support.
Yeah, and what I would do in this situation is I would just not cold-bloodedly, but to sort of very consciously use the one for the personal support and the empathy and all of that, and then use the other one's mind for the intellectual reach and stretch, you know, sort of bounce between the two. It's almost like, you know, Tweedledum and Tweedledee. You just get what you can from the one, you get what you can from the other one. And you make it work for yourself and you get your degree. Be quite mercenary here. Yeah, make it work. Yeah, that's what I would do in that situation. No, don't try and change the one, you know, it's not going to work. Just work.
And I guess don't be distracted by that one that you're not feeling any sort of relationship with. Don't be distracted by that lack of relationship. Just power on and change your perspective on that supervisor and use them for exactly what you need them for.
Exactly. And then go and get the other stuff that you need from the other one. Because as long as you're getting what you need, you'll get through. Wow.
And Annie, would you like to finish with your question now?
Yeah, mine was more a comment than a question. I sort of fell into a research project for my first crack. I'm working at Queensland Athletics as a social work student, which nobody's ever really seemed to have done before. And my direct supervisor is a man of very few words, so I don't get a lot from him. But I've just been astounded at the academics that I have reached out to in this area. To a person, they have all responded thoughtfully to me, and if they can't give me specific information, they've CC'd some other professional, some other professor in their emails. They've all written back at least 3 or 4 paragraphs. It's been amazing, and that's sort of what's kept me going, I have to say. Yeah,
that's wonderful to hear.
yeah.
And funny enough, the research shows that how supervisors learn to be supervisors is how they were supervised. That's the training. It's what was done to me, I do. It's a bit like, I suppose, being a parent. No one trains you to be a parent. If you just learn how it was done to you, you either do it differently or you do it the same, So it's possible, Annie, that you had people who had been supervised, mentored properly, and they are now passing on that tradition. And that's really good to hear.
Yeah, no, it's been great. My list of people to thank now is getting longer and longer, though.
And I mean, at the same time, you need to have today's seminar will also just make it very make you aware that you are still going to have to go through these personal emotions that no one can help you with. You are going to feel anxious. You're going to feel like it's cloudy, and it is, as Shelley said, your rite of passage at the end of the day. It's just good learning requires us to be supported on the way. And what does that look like? Yeah. Wow.
Okay, well, that was a nice positive note to leave it on, Nikki. Would you like to wrap it up and we can...
So I just wanted to say thank you very much for participating. If you are interested in this area of research, as I said, there are literally 4 people in the world that have written about this. So I've got 3 recent articles on this exact topic. So if you're interested in reading more, please go and you can Google me and you'll find those 3. They're all in peer-reviewed journals. So you can go and enjoy that if you so desire. Other than that, good luck. And thank you very much for sharing your particular experiences. I think it's really important for us to tell the university environment that this is not a taboo subject. We don't have to keep our chins up here and just power through. We need to, these conversations around power and support, etc., needs to become, publicly aired in the university corridors. So it starts by having seminars like this, I think. Thank you, Jodie.
Thank you, Nikki. Thank you again. And thank you all for coming along today. And thank you for sharing your personal stories as well. That's very brave of you. And I'm sure the whole group really appreciated it. And if you've got some feedback you'd like to share on this, on today's presentation, as I said, it's the first time we've done it. And if you think that there's some real value in it, I'd love to hear about that. And perhaps you could just drop me a little email at my skills@scpa.net.au email address and just provide a little bit of feedback. The record